when I was walking in the forest, it was actually because I was basically lost. It's a big area when you're walking through it. The
Yeah.
fairies led me out of there. They showed me the way to go.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, CJ Barnaby. Thanks for listening, and if you have an experience or lifestyle or healing modality you'd like to share with me on the show, email me direct at supernormalized@proton.me. That's supernormalized with a Z at proton.me. Or go to the website supernormalized.com and hit the contact button there. Any way you can, get a hold of me and get your story on the show. Okay, so welcome to Super Normalized, and Julian, yours is called
Revelations with Julian Palmer.
Yeah, so we're doing a shared podcast today, and we're going to, I hit up Julian about this about nearly 2 months ago when we had the one of the screenings for Contemplations in Brisbane, and I said, let's have a talk on a podcast about your fairy experience, and you said yes, and I was like, yes. Because look,
it's so
go ahead.
It's so interesting. I'm actually thinking about revisiting the place where I met the fairies because it was over 20 years ago now.
Oh, I know.
And I thought about taking a film crew there and seeing if we can document the fairies.
Wow, that'd be totally awesome if that happened. Now, look, I remember at that stage I was working in Sydney in a shop, and you posted that online. I think it was on the Shaman Australis forums at the time.
I think I had a little email list of people who I had collected email addresses of. It would have been about 20, 30 people who received my, often completely cooked missives. And I think you were on there.
I was definitely on that list because I remember reading it going, oh my God, that's just totally off planet. It's so awesome. And to be honest, it touched me. I was like, wow, this is excellent. This is, to me, this is an authentic fairy encounter. And, it blew my mind. So that's the reason why we're here. And I wanted to talk to you about that. So we go back a fair bit. We've known each other, and we actually worked on a website together for a friend way back in 2000. Was it 2000?
Yeah, it would have been 2000. I think I met you in 1999 when you were visiting Daryl in Upper Main.
Yeah, Daryl, that's right. Yeah, we met there. That's right. I remember that.
And so you were pretty much the first person I met who was really into psychedelics.
Oh,
and
really?
I had it. I had in 1999. I'd taken LSD a few times. I was just starting to take in 1999. That's when I smoked DMT halfway through 1999 for the first time. And that's when I first started taking mushrooms. And that's when I met Daryl halfway through 1999, when The Matrix came out, when I saw The Matrix.
Oh, God, yeah.
And so it was a pivotal date for me, that time. And that's when I quit working in IT with my friend Daniel. And I pretty much ended up, like Daryl was living in Upper Main, and I'd go visit him, and, we would hang out and take psychedelics and go to parties. And I remember you came round at one point, and I had all this, like, datura, because I was living at Upper Maynham at one point as well, because I moved out of Crabs Creek, and I had all this datura flowers, and you were like, whoa, be careful of that. You could go blind,
Oh, only temporarily, but yeah, that's right. I always put a warning on that one for some people because they think, oh, it's an easy access, but no. It's got a lot of caveats that go along with that, and that can be, hard for some people.
But I didn't take that much. I just made the tea from a flower, and I wouldn't do it again. You feel quite ill and delirious, and there's not many redeeming features of it,
True.
But it's not datura, it's a brugmansia. That's the thing. Technically, it's a brugmansia, So I remember you saying to me, who would you rather meet, Jonathan or Alexander Shulgin? And I thought at the time, I don't really want to meet either of them. Like, this is not my tribe. I'm not really into this. I was more mystically orientated at the time.
Would you say you were more Terence McKenna?
I did. I wasn't that much into Terence. I liked listening. I listened to him a little bit at that time, but not that much.
So I'm not more like Carlos Castaneda.
No, not really anyone. Like, I probably the person who really got me started on my path was a man called Robert Monroe.
I know Robert Monroe.
Yeah. And I read him when I was 18, around the first time I took LSD, and his book was so fresh and so well written and so pure. That really touched me, that, hey, this is something. He's talking about the meaning of life. He's talking about religion in a non-religious, non-dogmatic context. He's talking about the meat and meaning of what it is to be human. So I was catalyzed by him. And then when I went to university, La Trobe University, in 1993, in the humanities, utter waste of time. Like, I actually quit in September when I was studying feminism in the three subjects I was studying: philosophy, cinema studies, and English. I was studying feminism. At that point, I just quit. I was like, this has got nothing to do with feminism, has nothing to do with any of the authors or films or anything. They're just smashing all these concepts together and wanting you to put it together. And I was like, I am not doing this. I didn't see it as propaganda or brainwashing, but the upshot of being at La Trobe was it had a fantastic mystical library. So you had the complete, notebooks of Paul Brunton, in triplicate, the 12-volume, and so all of the theosophical books, pretty much from the 19th century, they've had, 10 copies of all of them, all the Annie Besant, Blavatsky, So I read all of the works in the Western mystical canon. I would have read 10 books. I was a little bit thick. I didn't read any of the books in my subjects, but I read 10 books a week on the history of Eastern and Western, Southern and Northern mysticism, anything I get my hands on. And then I kept reading 10 books a week for the next 3 years. And then I ran out of books that I wanted to read.
So you were doing a PhD in spirituality rather than what they were trying to sell you. So
Exactly. So I still remember in great detail the entirety of, Jiddu Krishnamurti's life story. So because I read all his biographies, for example, so that was absolutely fascinating stuff to me. The time when he had his Kundalini awakening and people would speak through his body, and talk about the upgrade of consciousness that was happening. And, that would be a fantastic feature film, like Krishnamurti's story. Like, do you know how he was discovered?
No.
What happened there?
No.
He was discovered because the Theosophical Society had a library in southern India. I think it was near Madras. I'm not entirely sure. And the what's his name? Charles Ledbetter, who was a psychic, went down to the river and he saw this young Indian boy swimming in the river with the other kids. And he said, "Who is that boy? He has the brightest aura I've seen on any human being I've ever seen in my life." And they said, "Oh, he's the son of the one of the poor groundskeeper. They live in a little shack down there." And so he went and started talking to their parents, and he said, "Look, this kid is an idiot. He doesn't pay attention in school. He's not very bright, and no one really pays him much attention." But Charles Ledbetter was like, he came to the conclusion quite quickly, this kid's the Messiah.
Wow. Okay.
And so he took it. He said, "Look," he said to his family, "Look, we're going to give you lots of money, and we're going to school your child in the best British public schools and train him to be an English gentleman." And I know, what a story! What a story! I know.
I mean, wait a minute. What the hell was Charles Ledbetter taking to be able to see this? I mean, how does he have? What sort of visionary abilities has he got? What's his story?
Well, he's psychic. Him and Annie Besant are psychic. They could see auras. They could see thought forms. They received messages from, ascended beings.
Yeah, right. So
they were very serious about that.
So they pulled off all their own filters already. So they were doing really they were super open people.
Yeah. Wow. And then I want to get back to the fairies, but this is quite interesting.
Oh no, this is all leading into it. Don't worry about that.
Okay, all right. But so it's a little bit like what's that? The Pygmalion, George Bernard Shaw, where they're taking, it's a literal story but even more pronounced than that, because you're basically taking, I think he wasn't untouchable, but he was like lowest caste Indian boy, no education, and then they brought him up in the best public schools in within the high society of all the intellectuals and mystics and people who are part of the Theosophical Society in the 19 what do you call it, the 19 teens and the 1920s.
Yes.
And then I think it was in 1928 that he disbanded the Order of the Star and wrote this incredible speech called "Truth is a Pathless Land," disowning all of the mystical accoutrements and religiosity. And then he became a spiritual teacher, a pure spiritual teacher. And that's when his spiritual teaching began until he died when this was, I think it was in the 80s when he was 94. And he just kept communicating and sharing. And he would often walk with, he was friends with, what was her name? Indira Gandhi. He would go on, and he was friends with Aldous Huxley. And he was friends with, there was a story when he was at a picnic and they're with his friends in Hollywood, and a policeman came and saw them drinking and carrying on. And they said, "Oh, no, I'm Charlie Chaplin. I'm Greta Garbo." And I'm a Judeo-Christian Murdy, and the policeman's like, yeah, pull the other one. I'm out of Hitler. Get out of here. So he had this incredibly colorful life. So anyway, that's what I learned at university.
Well, it sounds like life goals. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So university informed you on a spiritual path, more so than anything, and that pretty much changed and affected your core to give you a way in life. Now, as part of that way in life, did you even believe in fairies at that time?
Well, yes, because I had read all the Finhorn books.
Okay. So you
you
knew how to tune in already.
Yeah, I think they're very interesting. The books, there's the ones by George Trevelyan, who's this quite sort of upper class character who one day he met a dwarf and started talking to a dwarf. And he wrote about this, and he connected with the what were their names? Peter and Eileen Caddy, who they were a manager of fancy hotels, and that gig ended for them, and they tried to get another job, but they couldn't. They ended up broke in a caravan park in northern Scotland, in a sandy place with bad weather, bad soil, and to survive they started to grow their own food in this kind of barren caravan park with nobody there. And so they pretty much, Eileen Caddy started to receive messages from the Holy Spirit, but also her and another woman started to communicate with the devas of the plants. So the kind of proof that they were really onto something was these, massive, unprecedentedly large turnips and pumpkins and, this incredible, bountiful harvest in like the most inhospitable place. So that place became Finhorn, and it became a center for people to communicate with the devas and the nature spirits. And that was in the 70s, I think. And I think it peaked maybe in the 80s. And then, like a lot of these things, the bureaucrats and the red tape people come in and sort of strangle it. And I think it's possibly still kicking along in a kind of, bureaucratic way without that much, spirituality running through it.
Well,
that's what I've heard anyway.
Well, that's what happens when the NPCs get a handle on it. They're like, I need to do this too. And then they're like, oh yeah, put it in a box. Buy this CD.
So when I met the fairies, I didn't have as I recall, I'd read all those books before that time, because I would have read those books in the 90s.
Oh, 90s.
It would have been the mid-90s, and I met the fairies in 2002.
Yeah, but you weren't. Point, so first of all, we should actually go over, where did this happen?
Yeah. So it's pretty much at the end of Upper Wilson's Creek. Yes. I don't want to name names or anything.
No, don't go too specific.
There's all those properties, which they all know each other, and some of them do various things. And I've lived at some of those properties pretty much right at the end. And there's some tracks that go up to the ridge up the top there, and it's absolutely, it's quite a beautiful place to go, special place to go. Yeah. And so I would go up. This was the first time. This is before I lived there. This is the first time that I went up there, and it's it's harder to get up there than you think. It's quite a bit of a hike.
Well, I remember I remember you used to run around, like, for you, your hiking was, I think, for all I remember, it was take no water, just a towel. And that was it. And because I actually encountered you one time in the bush, I'm like, "Hey, go!" And like, what?
Really?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And I was like, "That's all you had." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay."
Yeah, I was a bit more of a space cadet than I am now, like age has kind of wizened me slightly, but I didn't take any water. I wasn't but even now, I will start to go somewhere and I'll get enthusiastic and I'll be like, "What's on that little hill over there?"
Yeah.
And I'll get there. I was like, "What about if I go around that ridge?" And suddenly I'm like hiking through this thick forest and, barely get to my car before 9 p.m.,
Yeah.
So it happens. But I, often take water these days and a little snack or two. But yeah, on that day, I left it a little bit late because I actually hitched to the end of Upper Wilson's Creek. Need like 5 lifts to get there. It takes a little while to get there.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been about 5 p.m. or something like that. And I thought to myself, and I could see all these houses around the other side and they look really close. They're like, "Oh yeah, I'll just go down there and I'll hit one of these driveways and I'll then I'll hitch back from there." It looks so easy, right? Rather than go back down Upper Wilson's Creek, wait now someone to pick you up and, So it made sense at the time, but very quickly I don't remember what time of year it was. I can look it up, actually. I look it up now because as I've got it in just a document here. So
do you have your original document?
I do, yeah. So it was November 2001. Actually.
Yeah, I was going to say it was coming into summer. I remember it coming into summer from my memory.
Yeah. And but it got dark quite quickly, and so I went down this gully, and suddenly I'm in a riverbed, and it's quiet, and I'm like, okay, well I can traverse that. But then it got dark much more quickly than I thought. And I'm traversing this riverbed and it's so dark, I can't even see my hands in front of my face.
Wow. Yeah.
And because the banks is quite high on either side. And so I have to scuttle with my hands in front of me so I don't bump into any rocks and just feel it out.
Yeah.
And so this was hours and hours of traveling quite slowly. But my spirits were good. I didn't feel like, oh, I'm doomed. The world is going to end. Because the weather was quite good. I think I was wearing shorts. Every now and then I'd sort of hit a rock and it was like, oh, ouch, but it wasn't that bad, and the water, I was just drinking the water. I wasn't hungry. And so I was like, okay, my mood was just like, yeah, I'm just going to make my way. And I kind of almost wasn't thinking about it. I was almost like, well, I didn't think, I'll get off this riverbank, because it just felt like an unobstructed path when you got a waterway, and where there's rivers, there's often humans. And I felt like, I'm kind of going in the right direction. But it's interesting to think in hindsight, my attitude was there was something pulling me there, In hindsight, I feel like I had an appointment or like I was drawn there. It wasn't me just being a total space cadet and taking the wrong turn down the valley. Right. It was, I felt maybe like gravitationally I was drawn there. So it was hours, hours and hours, going very slowly. and like I said, my spirits were good.
Was the forest silent?
The forest was really quiet and there wasn't much going on. But after a time, I felt like, you know what? And I don't know why exactly. Maybe it was just a kind of the river. Maybe there was a drop off, or maybe there was a waterfall or some, like a cliff or something. I don't remember, but I basically realized, okay, but I remember turning to the right and I had to climb up all this lantana, and the riverbank was really high, much higher than the riverbanks of that region they normally are. Yes. Normally it's, just a few meter or 2 or 3. This was like, it felt like 6 meters, 8 meters, something like that. It felt like a long way up.
Yeah.
So I, scampering up the lantana and these waterwilds, which are these awful plants that they just hang on, they spike onto your flesh, and you have to peel them off. It hurts. Yeah. So so I did that, scampered up the bank, and I noticed the whole area is like lit up. It's like, oh, there's light here. All right. But the first thing that I saw was like this huge tree. It would have been like, you don't see that many huge virgin trees where the loggers didn't go in that part of the world in New South Wales, because the cedar cutters and all those guys who went after the trees, how long did they do it for? Pretty much 100 years.
Yeah.
They were going after these massive trees. That's a long time, a lot of country. Even you go in the middle of nowhere, they've got their bullock trails out there to haul out these huge trees. But this place, they had not got to. It was like virgin trees. And I had not seen trees that wide before in this part of the world. I'd heard about them, but I'd never been to a spot. Like, they would have been about 30 feet wide, something like that. Massive.
Huge.
I mean, it might be, my fish was that big, but it was incredibly massive. But that wasn't the startling thing. The startling thing was a little cave about a foot high below one of these trees, with a little like white unicorn about that big, with a little fairy herding the unicorn into the cave. So at that point,
yeah,
I'm like, I am literally the character in the movie who is like rubbing their eyes, going, okay, I'm cooked, I'm delirious. Like, people ask me later, did you take any drugs, man? Like, what psychedelics did you take? It's like, I just got lost. I did not take any psychedelics. Yeah. I just, I think what happened was that because I'd been in the dark in this what do you call it? It's a new moon, isn't it?
Yeah.
No moonlight, nothing. It was completely dark, and probably clouds as well.
Yeah. And thick foliage.
Yeah, and lots of foliage. So no light. My eyes had adjusted to a different frequency, and that I was able to see a different dimensionality. But that moment, I had walked into another field of consciousness. It was like a psychedelic experience, because as soon as I saw the fairy herding the unicorn in, it was like I'd walked into a party that I had not been invited to, and everyone who's at the party just stops and go, who the fuck invited this guy? It was like that. So it's like all these fairies, they were just like, I think they were as surprised to see me as I was to see them. There would have been about half a dozen of them in different areas of the forest, which, by the way, is lit up. Like, I can see every leaf, branch, leaf on the ground.
Right,
It is surreal.
Where's the light coming from? Is it just coming from around everywhere, or?
It's emanating from the fairies. They've got little lights on top of them. They've got little torch things. Yeah.
Like little headlamps.
So, yeah, and they can light, the rest of the night, they would light up and illuminate any area of forest that they wanted to, because they ultimately shapeshifters. They weren't stuck to their Disney-esque form. So, my response at that point, because it was a very vivid experience, and you can kind of rub your eyes, but it didn't go away, and it didn't appear to be any kind of, there was no sense that it was suddenly going to change into something else. It was a solid experience.
And they had eye contact with you?
Well, they're small. They're literally, as they appear in popular culture, they're just like that big. They're not as they generally appear. So I can't really see their eyes that well. I can see they have eyes, but I can't see. They would never get that close to me the whole night. Right. So I could never really see their eyes or a great amount of detail. I could see some detail, but it wasn't like, I mean, I could see through them. They weren't opaque. Right. I could see through them. They were opaque to a much bigger degree than you would expect. The unicorn looked completely opaque at the time. And it was kind of weird because I didn't see the unicorn again. I have no idea what that was about or why that was something that was happening or what that means, So it was just surreal. And the experience then was that I basically, it took me some time to just acclimatize to the fact that this was happening.
Yes.
And I've got the text here. So I didn't take anything, obviously. I would suppose that would be my last impulse, trekking at night through the forest. What I felt had happened was my eyes, after 4 hours of almost complete dark, had become so sensitive that my vision beyond our perceptible range had widened. And the constant walking attention that was required of me to negotiate obstacles had put me in a state of inner peace and stillness. I quickly saw these holographic fairies fly about and around me up to about 10 meters away. And after a few sweeps by, when I could see them clearly, I realized I couldn't be hallucinating them. They appeared very real to me. They look surprisingly like the images and ideas we have of fairies. For the next 3 to 4 hours, there were mostly 5 or 10 around me, communicating, sometimes 1 or 2 of them. I could usually see another 5 or 10 around the area, and they lit up whole areas with this white phosphorescent clear glow. It quickly became apparent they could shapeshift, yet they would usually shift back to their fairy outfits and wings and smallish size. They each wore different clothes, traditional-looking garments that had been kind of updated, very stylish and beautiful. The female fairies were especially touched when I complimented them on their clothes and showed me in detail what they were wearing. The male ones appeared to be more into shapeshifting than females. They would often shapeshift into sizes 3 times the size of a height of a human being, casting a wide glow around the area. Sometimes in that case, I could see colors in their clothes and faces. The closer they came, the more I could see the energy bodies, which would often flange and generate energy. For the next 3 or 4 hours, they were with me as I walked. I often stopped and just watched and talked to them. they would shapeshift into how they saw human beings and very wittily enact the folly and humor of our interactions very cleverly, individually and collectively. They even enacted how they perceived our sexuality, all in such a way that you would be able to conceive a human being doing with very unique and pure perceptions. It was clear that they watch human beings very carefully and had adopted a lot of our forms and shapes into their play. That's most of what they did. They just played. They were incredible actors and would take great delight in mimicking anything and then slowly turn the idea around like a musical composition. The other fairies would often just watch in complete stillness and see the way one idea was transgressed and played with. This seemed to fascinate them. For me, some of their antics were a bit slow, as they covered every single interesting exploration when taking on a form, turning it back and front and around. I often looked away and looked back a minute or two, and they were still playing the same sequence. So that's a little bit of the document that I wrote at the time. Yeah, and
excellent.
I'm looking at it now, and it's like, yeah, I need to edit that. There's I pick up a lot of errors in there.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd love to share that on the podcast page. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. I've got yeah, for sure. So
wait a minute. So you're going through this and you're having this quite a long interaction with them that lasted hours as you're walking through the forest. Did they try to communicate with you in any way, or give you any messages or anything like that?
No, they were like, "What are you doing here, buddy?" That was their kind of attitude. They were like, nice. Yeah, they were really cute. They're so cute and fun and playful in the really cheeky way, like they've got a kind of innocence about them, like a real, more so than the Disney version,
Yes.
And they were like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm looking for trees that have DMT in them." They're like, "What's that?" You smoke it and you have this mystical experience, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't know anything about that." But they didn't really ask.
Yeah,
they weren't really intellectuals. They didn't really care that much. They were like, "Yeah, that's not really in our purview."
Yeah, we're already multidimensional, so bro, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well, we haven't really heard of that. But they didn't really ask me like questions about that. So I had a telepathic communication with them.
Yeah.
And they would also enact and play in front of me and shapeshift. And the shapeshifting was highly impressive.
Yes.
I'd never heard of this shapeshifting happening before. I never heard anyone talk about this shapeshifting as a characteristic of these fairies. And like what George Trevelyan said is that the dwarf and the fairy is simply a archetypal manifestation that we create in our brains as a response to a multidimensional energy that doesn't have the same form. So I disagree with that. It seems to me that they actually do have an archetypal form. And I suppose the real takeaway for me about this was like, I had wandered into really the heart of the fairy kingdom.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows that area knows there's a magic in that area. It's, the Hollywood movie stars might have moved in, but you can still find it here and there, deep in the forest. And it's one of the most biodiverse, the second most biodiverse subtropical rainforest in the world. The most biodiverse is in South America, adjacent to the Amazon.
Yes.
So it's a very special part of the world. And after, I'm not jumping forward all the way. I'm just reflecting on the experience. But
sure.
After the experience, I was like, okay, I watched the movie Fern Tree Gully.
Yes.
I don't know if you know this movie. Yeah.
I do.
And the funny thing was that I'd met one of the people behind that movie, one of the movie makers who I interviewed on a little website I made in 1997. It was like before podcasts were podcasts.
Yes.
I used the first version of Real Player to have these little interviews that I recorded with interesting people.
Very
you
cool.
know. So it was like I tried to get funding for it from various bodies because no one ever seen anything like it. But you know, it was cool. People liked it. But anyway, after the experience, I watched Fern Tree Gully, and one of the things that struck me was, okay, those Disney they look not dissimilar to the Disney fairies, very, very close.
Yes.
And you often do find this, that these archetypal beings and forms you encounter in the psychedelic space, even you might encounter similar forms and processes and visual cues that you encounter within the realm of the human creative dreamscape that manifests in video games and in movies.
Yes.
So I had an experience of seeing this creature fly over me once when I was in a float tank, and he was smart to fly over, otherwise I would have, taken him out. But he was dead set Jabba the Hutt.
Wow.
Dead set Jabba. So I was like, okay, Jabba has got this tail.
Yeah.
And if you watch the first one, you don't know he's got that tail. Like, yeah, he had that tail, everything, dead set. And so I was like, where did the idea for Jabba the Hutt came from? And all these Star Wars creatures. So I don't remember the name of the guy, but the special effects guy, to get the download of how these creatures would appear, he would take 1,000 mics of acid in a cupboard with his cat.
This is wild.
I know. So I was like, okay, the Fern Tree Gully story was not and I did a lot of research on this, was psychedelics were not involved. But the writer, she would spend time, she was living in nature in northern New South Wales, and she'd go down by the river in quiet meditation, and she'd start receiving this story, and she'd wrote it down, and that became Fern Tree Gully.
AKA Avatar.
So yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah. Have you seen the recent one?
No, I won't see it.
The new one?
I knew it'd be garbage, and my wife went and saw it, and she actually left about an hour and a half in and walked out crying because she said it was such an awful film.
It's like I had heard, through people I thought were reputable on Facebook, who I follow, and they said it was good, and I watched it, and it was like they replayed and pressing every button and trigger that Disney has ever done, and like just wound it up a few more times. And so at every moment there's no sense of anticipation or that this is going anywhere interesting. It's just the same old bullshit you've always seen, but in a much more cheesy way. But anyway, I digress. The Fern Tree Gully was inspired by a woman who had the visions on it. And then when I watched it, the most interesting part of it for me was when the loggers, when they were logging, it was in the Mount Warning National Park.
Yes.
Now, not Mount Warning. Mount Warning National Park is nowhere near Mount Warning.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually Mount Warning National Park is in the area behind Maynham, and it's not a big national park.
Right.
It's that exact area where I landed and had that experience.
Wow, because that's where I lived up in Upper Maynham. That was actually 1.5 kilometers from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had one experience with a fairy there.
Okay.
And I was living in a beautiful room in the forest, and when you live in the forest, you basically wee everywhere. So you go out in the morning and go for a wee on a wood pile or whatever. So one morning I get up, it's 4 a.m., go out for the morning wee, I walk, and fairy flies and sits and lands on a rock right to my right as I walk past it. And I said, "Oh, hey, fairy." I'm half asleep still, and I walk over and I'm doing my wee, and I went, "Hey, fairy. Hey, fairy." That was a fairy. And by the time I turned around, it was gone. But clear as day. And it was for me the Tinkerbell fairy. It was the same sort of shape. Elegant, beautiful, and
that's right.
And graceful.
Very elegant, like 19th century femininity.
Exactly.
That kind of timelessness. It was not this cheesy, Disney sort of like, Wilma and Betty clothes. There was a real sense of like, the true elegance that's like pretty much extinct from our post-industrial technocratic paradigm.
It was a surprising moment, to me, it was just seemed like I was like still half asleep, but it seemed so natural and normal. I didn't actually apprehend it properly until it had passed.
Yeah. And did you get a kind of did they respond to you? Did they work like, oh, how curious?
Well, it felt like the fairy had flown up to get my attention, but because I was so relaxed about it, it just must have disappeared and flown off.
Yeah.
And that was about 4 a.m. in the morning in Upper Maynham. So
it was in the dark as well.
Yeah, still dark, just early twilight. Yeah, early twilight.
Yeah. And you've met other people who've seen fairies in the region?
Well, fairies, I would say other entities which probably are related to fairies. I did talk about one on another podcast that a ex-girlfriend had seen. She had been up in Mount Chowan and was at a doof. She was pregnant at the time, so she wasn't under the influence of anything. But being a pregnant woman, she needed to wee a lot, so she'd run off into the bush, and where she was, there was a whole bunch of ferns, so she would run into the bush amongst the ferns and squat down, right? And this one time she did that. She was there, and the party's about maybe 200 meters from her. Not even that really. Loud pumping psytrance music at the time, and it's about the same time as all of this. So, she was just relaxing into her moment, opens her eyes, and then suddenly in front of her is a short, hairy man. And he was, we'd probably characterize him as a gnome, but he's all dark colors, covered completely with sort of fur, little squashed up face, and naked but very angry. and he's bashing his fists onto his thighs, and saying something to her in a language which obviously said, "Can you stop that music? We can't sleep." Now,
well, you know who else I've talked to who's seen a fairy is a very famous Australian cricketing legend who, if I mentioned, in India, I would be mobbed by massive crowds,
awesome.
that kind of person. And he told me that he smoked DMT and he loved DMT and was quite surprised because you would not think
you wouldn't
that
pick
this, it's like straight up cricketer,
Yeah.
And he said one time he smoked DMT in his backyard and he saw a fairy, and it was a male fairy who was very gruff with him. And he said, mate, can you please stop throwing the cigarette butts in the backyard? How would you like it if I throw cigarette butts in your house? Fucking stop it. And then blinked out. That's it.
Well, he got the message, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I hope he actually stopped throwing those cigarette butts and got on to good terms with that. Oh,
yeah. Well, no, they had no further communications, And then he gave me a pink crystal, which I thought was lovely.
Oh, nice.
This famous cricketer. Yeah. Again, cool. He's like, you'd look at him on the telly, you'd like, no, I don't think this guy's into crystals and fairies and smoking dimethyltryptamine. But anyway, there's all kinds of people out there with their second, third lives,
Yeah, for sure. As I've found with a lot of these experiences and people that are experiencers of these things, sometimes you just don't talk about them at all. Part of that can be because you probably get called nuts, or you might be seen as just not altogether there in some ways, and that's shunned in our society, which is completely bonkers because the natural world is the natural world, and I see this as all a part of the natural world. So that's a part of the reason why I do my podcast, and I call it Super Normalized, because the supernatural becomes normalized. So yeah. So I'm trying to find people that are interested in talking about their stories, no matter how out there they are. I mean, we've had people on that have had all sorts of things, from UFO encounters to encounters with Australian original peoples, tall man, hairy man. And
yes, I know people who are into that as well.
Yeah, the shadow people, all sorts of things. I mean, these things are normal, and as soon as we admit that, people that have had those experiences can talk about theirs, because not all experiences are positive. Some experiences are scary, and and it's good to talk about it so you can get it off your chest.
Yeah. When I was walking in the forest, it was actually because I was basically lost. It's a big area when you're walking through it.
Yeah.
The fairies led me out of there. They showed me the way to go.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
Lit the way, said, go this way, over that ridge, like down that gully, turn left there, turn right there. And then the last image that I saw, and I only understood this later, was I saw this woman at a writing desk writing,
telling you to write about them.
I didn't get it at the time. I was like, what is she writing? I'm a little bit I was a lot slower then than I am now. I'm not the fastest person now, but then I was a lot slower, and it took me to write that down, to go, oh, they were saying they wanted me to share this, to write it. And that would make sense, that it was somehow I was gravitationally drawn to this place, which how would you go there anyway? I would probably struggle to find it. I've looked at maps and stuff. Navigating virgin bush, which I do a lot, it can take an incredible amount of time just to go 500 meters at times. And this is quite a large area. But when became light, I arrived in this place, which was probably the most sacred site I've ever been in Australia.
Okay.
And I thought I'd arrived at the pinnacle because there were these huge rocks, like phalluses coming. They didn't look like natural formations. They looked like something out of the Dark Crystal or something, like pillars that went straight up. And they were very tall. I don't want to say how tall they were. I'd probably exaggerate, but I thought I was at the pinnacle, and you know how big the pinnacle rocks are.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing is they were coordinated with one another. That there was, as I recall, like it was over 20 years ago, but there was a sense there was one here and there was one there and there were others around it, and they were quite tall and thin. And then around them wrapped, so I couldn't get close to the rocks or touch them because there were plants. There were these crazy plants, looked like they were out of a video game, that had these huge spikes on them. Like, so I couldn't even get close to them. I know. Oh. So this is by the time the light had arrived, I'd arrived at this place and I was seeing these crazy plants. I was obviously in some secret site that looked like, I don't even know how rocks got like that in the middle of the forest.
It's probably
and it felt like I'd had this picnic at Hanging Rock. Like, holy shit. It was as startling as the fairies coming across that. Yeah. And that was around 9 a.m. And it took me to about midday to arrive at Maynarm Road. And then do you know Egbert Weber?
Yes, I know Egbert.
Yeah. So I just was in the middle of the road. I just put out my hand and he drove me all the way into Byron.
Wow, that's a lucky find.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. It's good when you get a hitch like that.
I know. And that was the first time I met him as well, you know. Yeah. It's a bit of a kind of legend. Him and his brother is a well-known doctor, and he's a well-known osteopath in the area. Yeah, and and every time I've seen him since then, we have a little laugh about that moment of him like picking up this raggedy guy who'd been walking in the forest all night, had this crazy story to share. And
you actually told him the story.
Oh, yeah, of course I did. And like, awesome. And then he had no reason to disbelieve what happened.
Yeah. Wow, that's excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it would make it would be a cool short film or something like that. Or just maybe I thought about taking some cameras, not a camera crew, but maybe just go there.
GoPros.
And get cameras that can capture like different qualities of light and go on a totally dark new moon night and see what happens. Yeah, what communications can occur, you know.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it is important that humanity does have this connection to the elemental realm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If
we don't, we're missing something. It's like we're cooking before the advent of the tomato and the potato. You know, it's like back in the days where turnips as good as it got, and we are missing a part of our understanding of the ecology of Earth, which is the an etheric dimension, which is very closely connected to our dimension. You know, it's not, and I think, you know, it's important that we awaken to the truth of these realities that intersect with our reality, are embedded within our reality. and they're no less important or real than ours. And in understanding them, because they, like these fairies, compared to any other life forms that I've met, they're the most human, you know. If you think about, like, I've never met dwarves, I never met elves. I know people have met dwarves, but I never have. I've met elves in a cyber sphere. I've met fairies in a cyber DMT sphere, but they are the most similar to human life forms that I've met. And the funny thing is that they have a huge psychic imprint in the human imagination. And in the 19th century, there was those famous photographs, which are clearly fakes. Like, you look at, have you seen those photographs?
Yeah.
When they got those cardboard cutouts of the fairies, but people believed at the time. They wanted to believe.
They wanted to believe. That was the point. Yeah, because people know intuitively that you need to have this extra connection to nature. And I think when these things come out, people do hook into them. And that's also that hook also extends into spirituality, and that's why pretty much every purple woman of middle age likes to think she's Cleopatra.
So I think it's quite interesting. There was something very 19th century about the fairies, and there was something about the refined elegance of that time that makes sense, that people of that time aligned with the consciousness of the fairies. And the fairies had their cultural moment in the West when they became a firmly implanted archetype. And I think it's interesting, the issue we have these days with people is that they think that because something is a firmly implanted archetype, is that, oh, it can't be real, then you're just, oh, right, well, you just saw that archetype, so you just projected that, or you just try to make believe or whatever. It's like, no, the existence of these things is so predominant in the psychic field of humanity through inspiration and various forms of communication in the creative dreamscape, that we tune in, and our stories and our myths are imbued with the qualities of these beings.
Yes.
And so it's like, it makes sense if they're real, that they have had an impact on our art, on our culture, that they've made an impression already. So that's why, like, it is startling when you see beings and you see themes in video games or in movies or in animation, and then you see the same thing in the in the psychedelic space. Like the H.R. Geiger alien character is very good example of that. And H.R. Geiger said, I'm misquoting him slightly, he said, some people think that I draw from imagination or creativity. That's not how it is for me. I draw from reality.
Awesome. Imagine having his nightmares. No, I see all of this connection to the other as highly important, and the other, regardless of whatever modern materialist patina we wish to put over it, will exist and will influence and will affect people no matter what. And there is another podcast that's out there called the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast that it basically goes through and has people talking about their experiences with fairies too. And it's often quite super, super straight and normal people just doing normal things. And they're like, oh shit, there was a fairy there.
Oh really?
Yeah, you listen to it.
That's funny.
They've got about 39 episodes now. I've listened to 36 of them and like, oh my god, there's so many stories. Yeah
that's cool. You're gonna we should put that in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. I will put a link to it for sure.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with your listeners, like maybe your website or the fact that you've written some books and you've got another book on the road happening soon?
Yeah.
And also your documentary.
Yeah. So the main portal for all things Julian Palmer is julianpalmerism.com. And the Contemplations documentary can be found, all the information trailers, you can download it, is contemplations.zone. If you go to my website, I've got a writing email list and I've got a workshops email list. And also, I do have another book which I want to bring out sometime in 2023. But I'm in no hurry because I'm pretty certain it will sell 200 copies and will be largely ignored. And I'm completely fine with that. I'm honestly fine. Happy that at least a couple of hundred people will read it. If it goes viral, I might have to go hide out in Equatorial Guinea or something. We'll see.
Excellent. You'll be supported by the fairies there for sure.
That's right. I know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, it's been an awesome chat, and it's always excellent to catch up with you, Julian. Yeah, I know I'm talking on your podcast, so I'll say that this podcast is available on supernormalized.com. That's supernormalized with a Z. And if you would wish to get in contact with me,
what, you're going with the Yankee spelling?
Well, I did research and I found that most people spell it with a Z.
All right. I'm trying to hold a fort that's untenable. I think I should just give up and go with the Z.
Yeah, I don't really care as long as people find it.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. And you're on Stitcher as well, which is my favorite podcast app, which is good. You were submitted to Stitcher.
Yes.
And Spotify.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. That's great.
So please subscribe to Julian and please subscribe to me. And if you'll have any stories that you'd like to share too, come and contact me at supernormalized@proton.me.
Oh, you'll get all kinds of wackadoo whack jobs. If you listen to my podcast, send your messages now, Chris. You're like, no, this is too weird. I'm not doing this.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, it's good to chat and share.
Yeah. Well,
about Krishnamurti.
Yeah. Look, and we've covered so many interesting things there, and it's awesome to hear your story again. Just stay on before at the end here, and I'll have a chat with you.
Excellent. Let's do that.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.